Why couldn't you just do your goddamn job? All you had to do was continue to be a mediocre fighter. How hard can that be? You have no idea how much you've screwed me over, kid, Harold growls. My immediate thought is that he's working with the heroes, but I keep my mouth shut, not wanting to add fuel to this fire. Why the hell would you think you needed to get involved with that situation? You really think if Buster couldn't do it, you would be the deciding factor? Your type have no clue of their place in the universe. None. And now I get to literally pay for it. Harold shakes his head, pacing angrily. What the hell is going on? I say, starting to shake as I look down and see organs. Really? You still haven't figured it out? I thought you were just playing along after the first fight. Let me ask you a question. Anyone ever recognize you from that kids' show you were on? You were a bouncer. Tell me about one drunk that took a swing at you because of it. Shit, tell me about one name you were called. Harold is seething now, talking down to me like I'm a slow 3-year-old. It was nothing. Little local affiliate station show. Who is going to remember that? I say, confused. But popular enough to get 3 seasons if I'm right. And the bars you worked at were just as local as that TV station. Think, Terry. Have you ever caught a rerun? Seen it on DVD in a $5 bin? In fact, what format were the episodes you showed size in? Harold walks further toward me. He places a hand on my face, gently tapping my cheek. VHS tapes. Why? I have no idea what these clues mean, let alone how they apply to my current situation. Harold slaps me, feeling like a lead fist covered in hard leather. Easier question. Do you notice how you have exposed guts and seem to be doing pretty okay right now? He screams, backhanding a pitcher of water and stack of glasses off of a bedside table. I have less than nothing. I don't want to confess, and I certainly don't want to guess what he's getting at and piss him off further. He leans down, his face inches from mine. I can smell his breath, like expired bread and cough syrup. Let me enlighten you then. Humans are so goddamned fragile. And sorry, kid, but I may have exaggerated our doctor's healing abilities. Combine that with an ego that makes them feel invulnerable after any kind of success, and getting one of the little shits to survive long enough to entice a few more to join, it's been an impossibility. Death after death, time and time again. And every time there needs to be another cover-up, more money out of my pocket. I was going to give up on the idea, actually. Then, I got an opportunity. A very costly opportunity. Someone who was one of us, if just barely, that had no idea of that fact. Mind reading is nothing uncommon, so I needed someone that wouldn't have a guilty thought. Someone who could walk into the ring without raising suspicion. Someone who wouldn't break at the first bad strike. Someone to be the Judas sheep to draw in the other humans en masse. You were that person, you simple little twat. You didn't film 3 seasons of some low-budget kids show, or rather, not one made by humans. You, kid, were picked to be part of something sinister. Call it a cursed show, a paranormal broadcast, whatever. There are as many different names as there are entities. But the thing is, not all of these go to air. The entity gets bored or comes up with a better scheme, and instead of wasting the time and energy keeping the pawns in whatever pocket realm they created, they loose them back into the world. They loose you back into the world. So I stalked you, figured out what makes you tick, how I could make you feel safe. And you would have been, too, if you had just stayed in your damn lane. He hisses this tirade in my face with a noticeable lack of saliva. So, all of this rainbow coalition, everyone can just get along shit was just an act?
I growl. I try to rise quickly, assuming if he is right, I should be fine. A bolt of pain strong enough to blur my vision courses through me. Harold laughs.
Still got that human ego. Don't let it get to your head, kid. You are no immortal, and as you can see, you can feel all kinds of pain. You can die.
Harold jabs a finger into the gaping wound below my chest, and I instinctively scream.
It just takes a long time to do so. So, if you really want to settle this with violence, we can. But after I break you, I'm going to rent out your broken ass to the worst folks I know. Entities that will tear you apart so slowly, when you get to hell, it'll be a relief. And no, kid, my second priority in life is to get some kind of actual communication between humans and us. But you know what my first priority is? Money. I can't do a damn thing without money, without the influence it brings, the favors it gets me, or the status it brings. I'm no monster. I just see the big picture. If I have to bury 1,000 humans in 1,000 junkyards, it doesn't mean a damn thing, because at the end of the day, I'm going to do so much more.
Harold finishes and lets the room go silent. So just let me go. I swear I'm not going to say a damn thing. I just want out, I plead.
No, kid, it's beyond that. See, I spent a lot just to find you. Money flows like water in my circles, but even with that being said, you put a severe dent in my wallet, a loss I can't just take with no benefit. So now, I have to spend more money to bribe officials, shut people up. You know the drill. So no, kid, you can't just get out. But the deal isn't going to change much. You still get your money, only now you stop when I say so. I'll let you go when I feel like it. The better of a job you do at being the great human hope, the quicker that will be. In 2 weeks, we have our first bout that is being broadcast to a broader audience. Only a few places, groups that are at the fringes of our world, but plenty of rowdy humans that could be the first wave of fighters. A stable that could stand to retire a member from time to time without raising too many eyebrows.
Harold moves back and begins to walk away, turning back for a moment with a scowl before leaving.
Now stitch that shit up. You'll be fine in a few days, he says dismissively.
The stitching was painful and disturbing. I knew on some level I was going to be fine, but being wrist deep in your own guts for the first time is not an experience I'd suggest to anyone. I took a cab back home. Each step sent fresh waves of agony through my body. Walking was out of the question. Harold was right. 4 days later, besides a jagged lumpy scar and a general feeling of being bruised and beat up, I was fine. Physically, at least. Mentally, I began a tortured downfall. Identity crisis, paranoia, depression, and desperation mixing together to create a storm of self-loathing. I ran through so many plans, some grim, some good, and some out there enough to be simply revenge fantasy. But by the end of the 4 days, I was staring at my inflated bank account and a contact list of the nastiest folks I've had the pleasure of knowing. I'm not an idiot. I had no plans to raise an army. What I needed was a few goons willing to watch my back with no scruples in regards to taking permanent measures in doing so. After an afternoon of calling, I found 6 guys willing to hear me out for the price I was offering. But the 7th was the most important. Never learned his real name. He always just called himself Reload. Not the kind of guy who could get a 50 cal sniper rifle, but more than able to get his hands on enough untraceable weaponry to outfit my goon squad. We set up a meeting at an abandoned warehouse used for the more intense type of fights put on by mortals. Guess I have to start saying things like that now. The night was dark and silent. I saw the 6 vehicles coming from far off. Reload sent me a text saying he was waiting as the other 6 guys parked and met me in front of the warehouse. We had John and Elroy McCain, two short, nasty brothers that embodied every stereotype about Irish folks with gusto. Anyone stupid enough to comment on their lack of height usually ended up at the bottom of a very deep lake. Eppo Vandergrift, as Dutch as the name suggests and a silat master, left the ring to pursue collections on behalf of folks in tailored suits with last names ending in vowels. 6'5" of steroids and silence. Maxwell Sift, ex-biker with a reputation scary enough that he never heard a word of protest when he decided to pursue a solo career. The man's jacket was scarier than half my opponent's. Jordan Fairweather, known as the Accountant, tasked with transporting large sums of money and known to leave the body parts of thieves nailed to telephone poles to make a point. The best way to describe him is half Jason Statham, half Satan. Finally, Rob Smith. At first glance, Rob looks like the type of guy who needs a scooter to get around, but under that highway to diabetes is enough honed muscle to move it like a freight train. A bouncer for the roughest environments, Rob's face was marred with any type of battle scar you could think of, hidden very poorly by long, greasy black hair. Okay, guys, there's a lot of explanation coming up here. Let's get inside, I say, opening a door and flicking on the lights. We see Reload from behind, tinkering at a table full of shotguns, handguns, and the like. As we start to get closer, something seems off. A couple of the guys greet Reload, but his response is an awkward wave. I'm about 10 feet away when I see it. The light glints for a moment, and I can barely see thin silver wires hooked into Reload. My heart skips a beat, and I make a dash for the table. I grab a revolver that feels light and cheap and look to the ceiling as I back up. Grab a gun, now! I yell as I see a black, many-limbed form in the dark recesses and support beams. The goons are confused as the body is raised on the wires and turned to face us. If I were to say Reload was killed, I wouldn't be doing the murderer justice. He was destroyed, mutilated, turned into a totem of my hubris. His eyes were torn out gaping caverns, his jaw hanging by only scraps of flesh. As the wires raised his arms, they also opened his jacket, spilling his innards onto the smooth cement floor. With one yank, Reload is drawn into 4 separate pieces, left dangling as whatever monstrosity was in the ceiling scuttled away. I don't even know how to describe what happened next, other than a lurch. It felt as if the entire building was being spun and dropped. Our vision pulsed through harsh, unnatural colors. There was a brief sense of traveling at enormous speed, then a feeling like being thrown into a brick wall. I came to, and we're no longer in the warehouse. We're in the lobby of a disused apartment building, yellowing wallpaper, floors that haven't seen a broom or vacuum in decades, and crumbling plaster hanging on for dear life on the ceiling. Variations of "what the hell" ring out like a chorus. I try to reply, but the guys are mad. I also notice none of them managed to grab a weapon. We all go silent as a rusted, abused payphone rings loud enough to cut through our shouting. Confused looks are exchanged, but I know who the call is for. I walk over and pick up the line.
You piece of garbage. You got a posse? A lynch mob? You still don't get it, do you? You are nothing. Worse than nothing, you are a damned liability. I was angry, but things are bigger in our society. You couldn't have given me a call, tried to talk this out? You're lost, kid. Now I've got to teach you a lesson. See, you think I'm a monster? I'm not, but I've managed to find one that paid me half your value to rent you out for an episode of television. A holiday special, if you will. Half your value is a loss I'm willing to take. So if you survive this, we can go back to being friends. If not, I'm not going to spend any more time on you, other than to watch, that is. You don't think you need friends like me? Let's see how you do without them then. You, my son, are part of a yearly tradition, the highest rated show for my kind of people. Trick or treat. Your goal is simple. Get from the bottom floor to the top. You cannot knock on any less than 3 doors per floor. If there is anyone left, they go free. I'd ask you if you have any questions, but I don't really give much of a shit, Harold says before hanging up. Explaining that to folks who view the world in very black and white terms goes over about as well as you'd expect, with the exception of one person. He's telling the truth, Jordan says. I've heard of shit like this before. I don't know about the woo-woo garbage, but I've met some sick bastards with coin enough to pull something like this off. Both of you goofs need your head checked. I'm out, Max, the lone voice of dissent, says as he starts walking toward the yellowing, cracked glass door. The revolver is double action, but I make a display of cocking the hammer and aiming it at him. Don't be that guy. If you leave, you're dead. Don't ask me how and don't ask me why, but I'm not going to let you convince a couple other guys to go with you. You guys are my friends. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, but I'm going to do my best to get us out alive. And if you don't buy that, then think of it this way. I've lost my mind over the past few weeks. Somehow I got you all here, and considering we're not in a 6-way Mexican standoff, I'm guessing I'm the only one armed. Either way, we are in some deep shit, so either try and take the gun from me, or fall in line, I say, somehow remaining calm. You think I can't take that piece off you there, Mini Tito Ortiz? Max says threateningly. I hope you can, I say, uncocking the hammer and flipping the gun around to him, butt first. Because, honestly, I'm sick and tired of living through this horror show my life has devolved into. Take the goddamn thing. I'm done. My tone starts to creep into the manic. He stares at me for a few moments. You better believe we are renegotiating when this is all over. I didn't sign on to get dosed and star in a snuff film, Tear, Max says, rejoining the rest of the group. We survey our surroundings, and the more we look, the less we like what we see. The scale for everything is just a little wrong, the architecture not quite square. Compared to what I've seen in the past few weeks, nothing horrifying, but nothing that is inspiring confidence. We notice 7 fabric bags, damp and smelling of mold, hanging on the wall. We each take one, feeling and looking a little stupid. So we just knock on the doors? Rob says, impatient. I assume, but be careful. We are in undiscovered territory here, I say in what I hope is an authoritative manner. After a brief discussion, we decide to just try the first 3 doors we come across. After no argument from me, I'm picked to go first. I stare at the number 101, surrounded by blistering paint, and steel myself. I give 3 brisk knocks, straining to make sense of the noise within. The door opens, not with the explosion of a homemade claymore or with some knockoff urban legend behind it, but with a small, if unwashed, old lady holding a large red bowl. She's wearing a long pink nightshirt stained with what I can hope is food. Her white hair sticks up in wisps, and her cracked yellow dentures move uncannily as she talks. The smell of cabbage and rot comes out of the apartment in a wave. Oh, what costumes you lads have! Such imagination, she says in an upbeat, aloof tone. I notice something moving under her skin, straining the paper-thin flesh of her skull for a moment. Tension has us on edge, and I see Elroy draw a thick knife from his pocket. I look to him and mouth no before turning back to the old lady. Thank you, ma'am. Trick or treat? I say, tentatively. She smiles, the grin stretching her lips from ear to ear. I feel the guys shift nervously.
Such a polite young man. Haven't I seen you on the TV? She asks, as a noise can be heard from inside the apartment. You might have. A little local work, a little amateur boxing. My tone tries to stay conversational, but I keep waiting for the terror to catch us off guard. She smiles and nods, reaching into the bowl and pulling out some dripping round objects and placing them into our bags. I try not to look, but I'm fairly sure I see eye sockets. I hesitate to think of what would have a skull that size. I go to turn away, and the old lady speaks, but in a lower, distorted tone. Are you forgetting my trick? Oh, such rude boys. I want a taste of the fat one. As she says this, she starts to drool thin streams of yellow fluid through her impossibly large grin. You can taste my fat ass, Rob says without missing a beat. Such a rude little boy. Will you not give me my trick? She focuses her gaze on Rob, who shows no signs of shock at her appearance. I get between them, trying to focus her attention on me. Is he going to survive the taste? I say, trying to keep things civil. The situation is a power keg just waiting to go off. Oh, are you his keeper then? Yes, little one, he will survive, and by the look of him, he won't even miss it. Her voice is predatory and greedy as a tube-like organ pushes its way out of her throat, snaking down to the floor and slowly making its way toward Rob. I wouldn't do that, Rob says simply, showing just the barest stirrings of unease at this eldritch turn of events. The old lady replies, but it's garbled by the flesh rope snaking from her mouth. Rob, just go with it. If we can get out of this with a flesh wound, that's probably the best case scenario. My tone is overly calm, trying to diffuse the situation. Sure, he says in a tone that I don't like at all. The tube begins to slide its way up his leg, leaving a trail of putrid slime. Once it hits waist height, though, Rob grabs it, quickly looping the snapping, salivating tube around one massive arm. He spins his bulk, rapidly uncoiling more of the tube. Once it goes taut, he gives a massive heave, dragging the old lady into the hall and delivering a right-handed blow that lands with an audible crack. The old lady is undeterred, though, and with a hissing shriek, tears herself from the tube in a spray of blood and bile. She leaps upon Rob, but can't get much purchase on his massive frame. They grapple and spin, tumbling back into the apartment. The rest of the guys take a step to jump in, and I block them. Let Rob make his mistake. No reason to get everyone else involved. But, to my surprise, Rob isn't having much trouble once he got his bearings. The old woman was stronger than she looked, but nowhere near as strong as him. He grabs her by the shirt and pulls her off of him, her ragged fingernails leaving deep gashes on his shoulders. He slams her straight through the thin plaster wall, face first with a growl. He tears her free and spins, looking like he's searching for something on the opposite wall. What he was looking for was a support beam. He found it. The next time he slams her, there is a sickening crack of bone and organs instead of a dusty spray of plaster. But he doesn't stop. He grabs the back of her skull with his other hand and slams her full force into the immovable beam, splitting open ribs and skull. He repeats this until her body is little more than a flattened hunk of unidentifiable meat, then tosses it to the floor, screaming with triumph. That's right, I'm Ash Williams, I'm fucking Reggie Bannister all rolled into one, bitch. Didn't need no shotgun either. You pussies didn't feel the need to help? Rob says as the noise from before starts to get louder, a shuffling noise that sounds like it is getting closer. Ma? An impossibly deep voice booms from a dark living room. You okay? The owner of the voice makes himself known, a massive head, almost too big for the living room doorway, larger than Rob himself, squeezes through. Deformed, uneven eyes, teeth the size of cinder blocks. After that is an arm. The doorway starts to break as the creature looks to the pulped corpse on the ground, then to Rob with a look of pure hatred. The second arm bursts the doorway as it wraps around Rob as if he were a doll. One of Rob's arms snaps before the creature even has a grip, and the large man begins to scream. I don't know if it was of its own accord or if the creature did it, but mercifully the door slams shut, leaving us with only the wet, cracking noises and screams of agony from the other side. Too bad Tubby couldn't just take one for the team, right, boys? But if you ask me, he wasn't really pulling his weight anyway. I recognized the voice, the ring announcer from Jim's, someone I thought I could trust. We have to keep going, I say, simply. I get no disagreement. We walk up and down the hallway, trying to discern any kind of pattern or clues on the doors, but either there are none or we are all too stupid to understand them. We decide on another apartment at random, 105, decorated with a peeling black cat. The door slowly creaks open after I knock, revealing an out-of-date but otherwise empty apartment. At the end of the hallway sits a large, clear bowl filled with nothing more sinister than bags of good and plenty. We are all looking for the trap, the monster, the supernatural turd in the punch bowl. All of us, except for John. It's changing the longer we stand here, he says, pointing to the ceiling. Sure enough, black, pulsing veins are starting to creep down the wall. John runs to the bowl, picks up a handful of candy, and comes back before the changes get halfway down. He doles out one to each of us and discards the rest. Well, someone is a little smarty pants, aren't they? I was looking forward to that, and so was our audience, the voice says again. Blow it out your ass, Elroy replies. The next apartment houses what appears to be a Catholic priest. Pale and spacey, he hands us small booklets without a word. One of you must atone for your sins, eye for an eye, render unto a god what you have taken from others, the thing posing as clergy says. We all look to each other. If unintentional, I've got a death under my belt, and judging by reputation, so do all of my crew. Surprisingly, Jordan, with his nearly urban legend status, steps forward. Try me, Padre, he says respectfully. The priest reaches out with a shaking hand and rests it on Jordan's chest. Jordan jolts a bit as his eyes blacken, his nose breaks, and several teeth eject themselves from his mouth. He hits the ground in a heap as the priest looks dejected. I expected more from you, my son. Looks like I'm going hungry tonight, he says, closing his door and entering the apartment. I help Jordan up, and while he looks beaten up pretty badly and seems to have trouble putting weight on his right leg, he is otherwise fine. How did you know what he wanted? I ask as we make our way down the hallway to a dank stairwell. I didn't, but the way I saw it, either he was going to do something based on who we've hurt, or just kill one of us anyway. He replies as we reach the second floor. But you've hurt more people than all of us combined, I say, confused. Psychological warfare. Anyone that tried to jack my delivery got enough force to stop it, and enough cash to go to another country. And the body parts? Friend that works at a morgue. After a couple of years of that, people just stopped trying, Jordan says with a smirk. The second floor is more dilapidated than the first. Garbage strewn everywhere and graffiti that gave you a piercing headache if you looked at it for too long. Bare, swinging bulbs provided scant, flickering illumination, suggesting creatures in the shadows and recesses. A palpable sense of doom permeated the air, causing fear, sweat, and soured stomachs. Floor 2 out of 3, you guys are not doing half bad, but we are going to do our level best to change that, the announcer taunts. Elroy offers to knock on the next door, The person who answers is a beautiful dark-skinned woman in her mid-30s, wearing a spotless apron and holding a tray of pumpkin-themed cupcakes. "Oh my, such strong men to have made it this far. Would any of you like to come in for a little bit of relaxation?" she says with a suggestive look. "Sorry, ma'am, but the siren thing is pretty played out. We just need our cupcake and we will be on our way," Elroy says with a combination of politeness and smug. "Are you sure? I can offer you a lot more than some old cupcakes inside," she smiles, revealing slightly pointed teeth. "Very sure," Elroy says. "Very well, but at least have one of the cupcakes. Let me see you getting some pleasure out of this night." She places one in each of our bags, holding out the last to Elroy. "There it is. I say no to them and I get my guts ripped out, right? Or maybe they're filled with brains or some shit? Lady, I'd eat 2 miles full of intestine to get out of this roach hotel," Elroy says, taking and eating the cupcake. "Holy shit, that is good," he comments as the woman frowns slightly. "What a pity. You'd have enjoyed my bedroom," she says, closing the door. "I'm starting to get this crazy shit, I think," Elroy says with a laugh, but starts to get a pained look on his face. "You alright, El?" John asks. "Just gonna sit down for a second. I feel a technicolor yawn coming up," Elroy says, sliding down a wall. "Give us a second," John says, sitting beside him. We wait for a while as Elroy starts to experience more pain, eventually curling him into the fetal position before he expels more vomit than I'd have thought it possible for the human body to hold. "Saw that coming," Elroy says, putting himself back into the sitting position. A moment later, a torrent of dark green vines exploded from his body, impaling John and rooting themselves into the wall. Myself and Eppo took a few scratches, but threw ourselves backward, quick enough to avoid John and Elroy's fate. They were both still alive somehow, still struggling, still screaming for help. Elroy split open on the ground like a discarded pumpkin, and John, bleeding and screaming, being held in midair by thick, thorned vines. Every second, more burrowed into him. He was begging for death or help. Jordan pulls out a knife and goes to cut the vines. Eppo grabs him by the shoulder and shakes his head. "Nothing we can do for them now," he says in the vocal equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare. "I don't want to agree with that, but I do," Max says. We cautiously move down the hallway, tossing glances back to the mass of flesh and vines that was 2 of our friends minutes ago. We again try and find some kind of warning or pattern to try and minimize the losses we're taking. But again, none of the changing graffiti nor the rotting decorations seem to give any indication. "So, we're just doing this blind?" Max says, exasperated. "Looks like," I reply, wishing I had better news. "I've got the next one," Eppo says, walking to an apartment and knocking. The door's open, not to some overtly scary creature or some sinister shape-shifting abomination, but a small boy. About 6 years old, blonde hair, and looking in need of a bath and some medical attention. I've enough experience that I don't take the kid at face value. I subtly cock the gun, ready to at least distract whatever this child ends up being. But I notice something else. There is an old chain, strung through with barbed wire and bits of metal, attached to a thick metal rod, confining the child and drawing blood with each movement. Eppo's stone-cold gaze melts as he takes a knee. Him and the child begin to have a conversation in what I assume is Dutch. Eppo begins to cry and hugs the child. The small boy produces 4 small hard pieces of what look to be licorice and gives them to Eppo, who in turn gives them to us. I try to ask him what that was about, to try and tell him that it was just this place playing with his mind, but all I get in response is silence and him shaking his head. One more, and we're in the home stretch. I decide to take the next door, Jordan flanking me, ready in case we encounter something that wants to fight. After the first knock, the door flies open, and I'm staring down a double-barreled shotgun wielded by something that could pass for human if you squint really hard. It was a deformed, plastic-looking thing in hunter's garb. It has me dead to rights, but Jordan is quicker on the uptake. He grabs the pistol from my waistband and in the same motion puts a round between the thing's eyes. Thick, gray goo bursts from the back of the creature's head, but I'm hit by another spray, deep red with chunks of gray from my right side. Jordan hits the ground, a small hole clean through the front of his skull and a massive exit wound on the back. My heart drops. Whatever was done to him was ongoing. If I could have just gotten out of the way, or put some more thought in the situation, he'd be alive. The creature, on the other hand, is still standing. It leans its shotgun against the wall and walks over to us, giggling, doling out a handful of what looks like dirty salt in each of our bags. The thing gives us an impish wave before closing the door. We try and take a moment, let our senses come back, but Elroy and John are screaming and begging louder than before. I pick up the pistol with a shudder and look up to see Eppo staring at me. "We can't just leave them like that. Give me the gun," he says, his accent a little thicker than usual. I nod and give him the gun. "Just be careful. We're almost done with this shit," I say, handing him the firearm. "I don't want to watch," Max says, walking toward the next stairwell. I join him. We hear the first gunshot, then the second, but after a brief pause, there is a third. We look backward, and while John and Elroy are still screaming and pleading, Eppo lays motionless on the ground, a pool of blood spreading under his chin. We don't say a word. We don't have to. In fact, I start to think that maybe Eppo was the smartest one of us. I shake those morbid thoughts away as we walk up the next staircase to the final floor. No time for giving up. I'd rather die trying to break Harold's neck than here in this torture chamber. The third floor, in contrast, is a beautiful sprawling affair in orange, black, and gold. Ostentatious and gaudy, without a speck of grime or dirt. Max and I exchange a glance. He nods, and we walk. The space between apartments is a few blocks at least, making the floor architecturally impossible. I use a large skull-shaped knocker on the fourth door we come across. What opens the door is somewhat familiar looking. It's not Size, but it is most certainly one of his kind. But the fact the thing is hunching with a 12-foot ceiling makes me think Size is either a child or a runt. It holds a large metal syringe and grins down wickedly. Max steps up, ready to jump in if it attacks, for what it's worth. I put a hand on his chest and meet the creature's gaze. "Hey, I've met your kind before. Folks don't treat you very well, do they?" I say nervously. It lowers its head close to me. "Better than they treat you," it says, bringing the syringe to my eyeball and laughing. "Maybe, but that's not much, is it? You don't have to do this shit. You don't have to play the role they give you. Our society is fucked. I don't know if you guys have kids, but you have to have friends, right? Don't you want to be something other than the lowest rung of the totem pole? I don't know anything about you guys, but I guess I can say my best friend is one, and he isn't some deranged killer. I've got to think you have a heart in there somewhere. If I get out of this, I'll owe you one. I know you're not just some apparition or part of this torture pit. You're an individual, maybe an actor or something, but you have a mind in there. Please, use it," I beg. I notice no change on the entity's expression, and I resign myself to whatever death Size's people dish out. "Turn around," it says after a pause that feels like forever. I do, and for a moment feel a light prick on my neck. The creature turns me, and I see no more than a couple drops of pink fluid in the syringe. "I won't forget about that favor, Terry," the creature says before producing 2 toffee pieces with razor blades clearly embedded in them. "How did you pull that off?" Max says, incredulous. "When we get out of here, I'll tell you all about it," I say, starting the walk to the next door. The hall is eerily silent, but as Max knocks on the next door, there is a deafening cacophony, like a Halloween background CD played through concert speakers jammed into an apartment, screeching atonal noise that we can feel as much as hear. Inside is a long, shag-carpeted hallway. It's a dead end, but one entire back wall is a massive organic speaker. It drips and bleeds, pulsing with the ebb and flow of the noise. And in front of this, a tiny table with 2 pieces of candy, somehow unmoving despite the din and bowel-loosening noise. Max looks determined and says something I can't hear. I assume a sound-based one-liner. He begins to walk into the apartment, fighting against the wind generated by the speaker. The carpet begins to grab at his boots, slowing his pace. I see drips of blood start to pour from his ears, but have to duck back into the hallway to avoid the same fate. The moments drag on. It becomes hard to breathe. My vision starts to blur, and I curl into a ball, covering my ears. Then, suddenly, the din cuts off. I look up to see Max's massive custom boots. He made it. Or so I thought. He hits the ground on his knees, and I get a good look at him at last. His skin is deep purple with ruptured blood vessels, his eyes deflated and bleeding, his teeth cracked and shattered. His mouth opens as he falls forward, spewing blood and pulped organs. In each hand he holds one of the pieces of candy. I take one, figuring he deserved the other, even in death. My walk to the next door is in a fog, half hoping some nameless horror jumps from the vent and ends this, but I'm not so lucky. I make it to the last door, and with no ceremony, knock. Suddenly, I feel that same spinning lurch from the warehouse, and in a few moments, I'm standing back at that abattoir with the bodies of 6 friends strewn around me. Of course, seeing what I did is just about the worst thing they could do to me. I almost want to laugh at the irony of it. I'm on the shit list of all the things that go bump in the night, and it's my own shitty plan that breaks me. Here is the part where you want to hear me scream with rage to the sky and somehow take that pile of guns on the table and make some awesome cyberpunk gun that lets me take revenge. Sorry, not how things turn out. Trauma, more often than not, does you as much harm as the events that caused it. I don't gear up and kick ass. I cry. Not the silent, tough guy cry that is the hallmark of action flicks, but a bawling, snot and drool-encrusted wail. No idea how long I did that for, but my throat was raw and my eyes felt like I'd rubbed them with steel wool by the time 2 entities entered the room. "You piece of shit," I say, locking eyes with the announcer, a quilled, skinny thing I'd take my chances with if Buster wasn't standing beside him. "Terry, I didn't know it was going to be you. By the time I got told what was going down, I couldn't say no. I'm so sorry, man. This shit isn't right. Harold went way too far," Alex says. "Oh, that makes it all better, thanks. You can go get shot by a redneck now if that's okay," I spit. "Terry, we're going to stop him," Alex says. "How?" I challenge. "Those heroes, we're going to make sure they do their thing, and make sure the cameras don't cut off this time. That shitstorm, broadcast to the humans and our people, he will never come back from that. He won't be able to organize a high school wrestling match. I promise you. We're not all like him, Terry. Just unfortunately, the most powerful of us usually are. Let's change that, Alex promises me, and for some reason, I believe him.